the 19th of August 2023. I made a few videos about Senator Tim Lombard. I put his name on this merely to link them up and so that you'll know it's roughly the same thing. And this is about housing and planning permission and assessment and government plans or programs. Article 2.3 of the SEA directive states that an environmental report shall be carried out for all plans and programs by the authority carrying it out for energy, housing, town and country planning, tourism, agriculture, fisheries, and there's a few more. Okay, so that's what the law says, and it says that SEA sets the framework for future planning consent for projects under the EIA directive. That's the local project. In other words, I say you have to have the SEA done for the overarching plan and programme by the government. If councils want to do a sub paragraph of that, they can, and then you apply for planning permission. I also say that by and large the Irish courts, with the exception of the Supreme Court, will knock anyone trying to avail of this, which is our right under the EU Constitution, and you have to go through all the way to the European Court of Justice to get this declared. But we have cases in the European Court of Justice, including the one that I collected a few euros for, and we're waiting on the result of these. Meanwhile, there's an effort by government to change the planning law to do what Senator Tim Lombard says. It doesn't make sense, he says, that someone from miles away can object. Now, I want to read a report that appeared about Bettystown. There's a housing scheme in Bettystown near the rivers, near the River Boyne and the River Nanny, in the confluence of those two rivers, built on a floodplain. And this is the article. Torrential rain in the early hours of Saturday morning, coupled with high tide, saw over 30 homes in Bettystown destroyed by flooding. And there's pictures of the house, water being up 4 feet at least on the houses. Emergency services helped some families evacuate their properties, while others chose to remain in their homes but without electricity and wait for waters to subside. This is only recently now, right? The scenes of devastation on the village estate and Eastham Road have led to calls for urgent flood prevention measures. Calls for urgent flood prevention measures. This is caused by the tide in the rivers, and instead of assessing the thing before it's built it first and ask questions after. Right now, so measures to prevent urgent flood prevention measures to be put in place while representations have been made to the Taoiseach's office. He's the one who allows the breaking of the law and promotes it in relation to energy, to the Taoiseach's office to request urgent compensation for victims of the flooding. So the taxpayer must pay for the fault of the planners. It's the whole of the village estate, which has something like 36 to 37 homes, and only 1 or 2 of these have not been affected. The rest are completely flooded, said local councillor Sharon Tolan. And of course, she'll not contact me or anybody else to see if this is legal. According to Councillor Tolan, the flooding threat started in the Northlands, which historically has always been a problem area, having been built on a floodplain. Well, why was it built on a floodplain? Isn't that what the assessors and the council and all are supposed to do? Is there any SEA for housing, for development of homes, town and country planning? No. Why? Because the government refuses to do it, even though it's necessary by law. Are Bord Pranola and the councils granting permission without it? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Right now. So this has always been a problem, and yet they built the houses there. And at the very least, they could have raised them maybe 8 blocks, bring them up a bit, make them high or something. Nothing. They just built them just on the sod, right? In 2005, councillors against the advice of planners in Meath County Council voted to make it residential, and once zoning is given, their hands were tied regarding the granting of planning permission. So what this says here, that the planners did object to it, but that the councillors overruled it. Well, you see, if the planners refused it on the grounds that there was no SEA and no proper assessment, the councillors couldn't object. That's the whole point of my case. This has nothing to do with councillors or anyone else. You must do your SEA on all public plans or programs, and it doesn't matter who objects or who doesn't. You do that first. If that FCA says they shouldn't be built, you can't do it. So the law was flouted, and the planners who didn't have the guts to refuse it on that basis. So when the problem started with Northlands, the Office of Public Works got involved, and a flood mitigation scheme was built, which for the most part was very successful. It done when there was only light floods. However, we always have 2 pumps on hand. They have to pump the water out. That's using electricity and fuel on hand, because we are smack in the middle of so many different streams in between 2 major rivers, the Nanny and the Boyne. Do you get my point, what I'm trying to say? Councillor Tolan believes the intense rainfall that fell in the early hours of Saturday morning is a wonder they're not blaming climate change for it. Morning, coupled with very high tide. I mean, did you ever hear of King Canute trying to stop the tide? Oh, high tide. Oh, we never thought of that. This is the gum beans you have. Together, coupled with very high tide, recorded at 4.95 metres, meant that there was no way to alleviate the pressure on the affected estates. So now they want remedial work done to stop this, and she says there's no way it can be done. Well, I mean, how do you deal with idiots like this? Even though the council were pumping it out of the Northlands, the water had nowhere to go, so the water levels rose in the village and the estate caravan park, and we have over 30 homes completely destroyed. Right? Is this getting through to you guys that's watching this? Or am I wasting my sweetness on the desert air? Councillor Tolan spoke with residents of flooded homes on Saturday evening. Some of them had family and friends they could go to. Some of them didn't. So now it's depending on the family and friends, and remained in their houses even though the ESB was shut off power to the estate. Well, at least it was warmer weather. It mightn't have been just as much hardship. That happened in cold weather. Oh, don't talk. Must have been an awful smell there as well. Okay, now, Council Chief Executive Fiona Lawless visited the scene today, Monday, and Meath County Council had been asked if they can provide skips to clean up of the affected estates so the clean-up can get underway. Council staff had been on site all the weekend pumping water from the affected areas and the Mornington stream once the tide started to abate. I've contacted the Taoiseach because of a compensation package has been put in place for these residents. Because, well, I read from the beginning of it, there was none. I don't know what's the stories there. They have no insurance. I think that means that's a misprint, because no compensation package is put in place. They have no insurance because they are on a floodplain. So when the insurance companies won't insure the house, why are they granting planning permission for it? Councillor Tolan says that had the flood mitigation scheme been delivered for their estate as well as Northlands, this wouldn't have happened. Do I notice a contradiction there? It either would or it wouldn't. I just can't get up there. It wouldn't be too long to find out. How are you going to stop the pump the tide? How are you going to stop the tide? I'd like that to be answered. Maybe somebody up in Meath, Bettystown. There's races up there. The Office of Public Works really need to act. They've known about this for years. Yes, they did, and so did the planners. And the planners told the councillors, the elected representatives, that you can't do this, that there was a floodplain, and the councillors overruled them, and they overruled them because the planners did not follow in EU law on the environment, to wit the SEA Directive, the Habitats Directive, and the EIA Directive, the Local Environmental Impact Assessment Directive. That is why that hasn't happened. Now, the thing about it is, the number of housing is not on the EIA Directive as such. I've never noticed it. But what it says is if the scheme will have significant impact on the environment, the council can insist on an environmental impact assessment. That's the local project. They can call it a project instead of a development. So if we'd say there was, my reading of it would be, if there was 10 houses up on a hill and there's no big deal, you might just need planning permission. I've never been able to find from experts who study this where the cut-off period or the threshold is. But certainly if there are issues with flooding and sewage and all of that, then an EIA should have been carried out, and the council can insist on it, and it would have failed the EIA, and the councillors could do what they liked. They would have to challenge it, and they wouldn't, right? Do you understand that? So now, the Office of Public Works, they knew about it for years, but should have built them there. The council built them and somebody granted planning permission. And then you blame the Office of Public Works. They took the responsibility from Meath County Council to deliver these flood mitigation measures. As far as I can see, they have dragged their heels. King Canute again. Commitments were made to residents and it just hasn't happened. The government, so what are they going to do? I'd like to know how is this going to be done. The government needs to step in here and make sure people are compensated and assisted. The government needs to stop fighting the likes of myself when I insist on the SCA being done and when we insist on the EIA being done right, and they did it in Derrybrien Wind Farm, and only for the European Commission took them up on it. They never assessed the turf, and now it has to be pulled down. It cost us an absolute fortune. That's what needs to be done. Why are engineers kept firmly out of all this? It is understood that the National Directorate for Fire and Emergency Management, which coordinates emergency responses and gives support to the Irish Fire Service, have requested the Department of Social Protection to engage with community welfare officers with local residents so they can assist with the humanitarian aid required. That's all right. Some of these people are very vulnerable people. Say that these people are not fit to fight in the courts like me. I had to go up. It's 16 days for me to take a judicial review in the High Court. It's another 9 to go to the Court of Appeal and another 7 or 8 to go to the Supreme Court. I don't have that time. And then they expect these people to do it. And that's why the EU is wrong. The EU should insist these things are done. And they only do it now and again, right? So the people are very vulnerable. Some are renting, poor old divils. Some are elderly. We believe there are some older persons on oxygen machines. See? Now, if I was forced to build those houses, I'd have raised them up 4 blocks at least. I'd have brought them up above the level of the flood, even though you might have to use steps or whatever to get up, or put in filling or whatever. I mean, it's too late to do that now, but they shouldn't have been built there at all. There are oxygen machines in the caravan park, and I'm grateful to the emergency services who made contact with that person. Oh yeah, there was only one apparently, somewhere that we believe. Some older persons on oxygen machines in the caravan park, and I'm grateful to the emergency services who made contact with that person to make sure that they had direct connection to keep oxygen supply going. So it says persons and one person, I don't know how many there are. It's been a really worrying and upsetting couple of days for an awful lot of people, and it is very hard and it's very hard having to walk out of that estate on Saturday night, leaving people who stayed in their flooded homes without power. Now, I think I have said enough. I have campaigned for the enforcement of the law. I have put my neck on the block and ran the chance of losing everything I had to try and force the enforcement of the law in relation to energy, but there are several other headings under which it has to be done. Some people laughed at me. Oh, you'll be beaten. I won one case. I didn't gain the other 2, but I didn't have to pay any expenses. And I'm actively trying to get more people to take these cases and where there's any money to fight them. And we hope to beat them eventually, and we think we have them shook. We had the great luck with case 2419. But does that not prove what I'm saying? A proper SEA, a proper strategic environmental assessment, would immediately look at water levels and water catchment and traditional flooding areas, which are mapped out for over 100 years and longer, would immediately look at it and carry out the basic engineering principle, and then rule whether it's suitable for development or not. And if land is so scarce, then you might have to actually build it up or use some other method of construction to get them up out of the water. I'm only saying that as a byword, but it's, oh no, the council was, oh no, God, I voted for him, he got the estate built. And I'll bet you any money when the estate was starting up, he was roaring on the radio, now this will be a great, I'm delighted to announce that we're going to build these houses in Bettystown, and we're going to house a lot of people, and then they'll all vote for me, and all this. This is what we are dealing with. I hope I've made my point clear, folks. Not too long a video. Give me a thumbs up if you agree. Give me a thumbs down if you disagree. And if you know anyone in this area or any other areas, it's a good thing to comment underneath, and so we'll have a bit of crack about it and everything else. I think for anyone living in their house to see the water 2 feet up on the sitting room carpet, I'm just thinking in this house, if we had 3 feet of water here, I mean it's sick. It is sick that after all the education we have, and all the universities, and all the engineers, and the mathematics, and everything, that's the dumbbell level we are at in the Republic of Ireland. Thank you very much. Goodbye.